The Dutch language is really cool. I think it's one of the coolest languages out there personally. It's hard to learn. It's really hard to learn, but not because the language itself is particularly hard, but just because it's just structured differently and it works differently, and words don't have the same meaning, but sometimes they sound the same. And sometimes they can be a little confusing, but it's also very intuitive, and I really enjoy it. A couple things to know about Dutch. Dutch is a phonetic language. Everything, except for words that they've taken from other languages, everything is written the way it's pronounced. So if you learn pronunciation and you learn their spelling rules, you can spell a word by hearing someone say it. And that can be really handy if you're asking for directions and someone is like, oh, turn left on this street. And you're like, oh, okay, I know the name of the street because I heard someone say it. And you can spell it in your mind just from hearing someone say a word. This also means that you can pick out where your pronunciation is poor, because they have very defined vowel sounds. I think someone told me they have 16 different vowel sounds, and they just use those in combinations or different ways, and then that constitutes all of their vowel sounds. And you can tell where your pronunciation is falling short. For instance, I don't differentiate between my A and my AA sounds, and that's a shortcoming. That's a failure. That's something that makes me sound American, or at least English speaking, because I don't have a clear distinction between the A and the AA sound. Dutch is halfway between German and English. It's closer to German than English is, and it's closer to English than German is. I hope that makes sense. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. The rules in Dutch, the grammar in Dutch, is extremely important. In English, we tend to follow grammar rules. Sometimes we butcher them a little bit, but whatever, as long as the meaning's there, and whatever, you know. In Dutch, the grammar makes the meaning. You use the grammar if you want to make sense. Like I said earlier, they'll understand if you use American grammar. They'll get it. But if you want to speak good Dutch, you have to learn the grammar and you have to learn the rules. And they're very simple. They're simple rules that are hard to apply and that have shades of meaning, which is a lot of fun. And the basic sentence structure is very easy. It's subject, verb, object, other things. So the verb always goes second. And then all other verbs go at the very, very end, which is fun. But if you're posing a question, the verb goes first. So it's fun. You got to pay attention. Often you can tell if someone is asking a question by the grammar rather than by the inflection, which is helpful. The more familiar you become with grammar, the easier it becomes to understand. And the easier it becomes to understand, the better your own pronunciation will become, because you'll begin paying attention to how they're saying what they're saying rather than trying to figure out what they're saying. Dutch does have a guttural in it. It has a guttural G. So instead of G, it makes a ch sound. So like Den Haag, H-A-A-G, Den Haag, or Groningen, G-R-O-N-I-N-G-E-N. Make sure I spell that right. Groningen. It doesn't have to be hyper pronounced. A lot of new missionaries come out with a really G, and that's very North Hollands, and it's not necessarily recommended practice. The G ranges from really, really hard in the north to really, really soft, just like a hard H, just in the south, in Belgium specifically. So just get to the point where it doesn't ruin your throat anymore to make some kind of sound. And once it's comfortable for you, just stick with that. You don't have to be coughing up your lungs every time you're saying a guttural G. In fact, it gets really annoying really fast if a greenie comes out and is like, and you're just like, oh, come on. So, a couple things to be aware of that can be trippy. They roll their R's, and I've been told by Dutch people that if you don't have some kind of roll to your R, it's very hard for the Dutch to hear the R. I'm not very good at that. I tend to use kind of a fake stop in the middle of my R, and it just sounds kind of goofy. But if you know how to roll your R, it doesn't matter if it's in the front of your mouth or in the back. But just a very slight roll on most R's will make you much more understandable. They have diphthongs, which are vowels that start making one sound and end making a different sound. And those are usually extremely difficult for people to handle. I don't remember the majority of them because it just became second nature, but the one I really struggled with was their EU sound, which is O. O. And that's not even a particularly well-pronounced EU, but that's how I got through it. One way that Dutch missionaries often explain the EU sound to their missionaries is to quote Hermione Granger, where she says, "It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Wingardium Leviosa." And that Wingardium Levio, oh, that's the diphthong. That's the sound you want to make. Wingardium Leviosa. And then you just have to learn to plunk it into any word wherever, which I'm still not particularly good at. It took me the majority of my time in Leuven to get to the point where I could say Leuven. But the Dutch just busted out like it's no big deal, which is pretty amazing. Other than that, it's just a lot of practice. It's a beautiful language. A lot of what they do is really, really fun once you start learning it. Because to make new words, they'll just mash existing words together. So like a platypus in Dutch is een vogelbeekdier. I mispronounced that, sorry. Vogelbeekdier. Beck and bake are different. A vogelbeekdier translates to bird beak animal, which is a platypus. So it's super fun. There are a couple of cities with names that actually mean things, like Den Helder is like of the glory, of the light, of the clarity. Or Den Haag is actually a contraction of what is it? Schravenhaag, I think is what it is, which is like the grave downs, if I remember correctly, or the burial place downs. Or Den Bosch is 's-Hertogenbosch, which I don't remember what that one means, but it's something like the forest of something something. So it's a fun language once you begin learning words and how they put words together. It's fun. It just gets fun. And often, if you don't know a word, you can say the English word, but with Dutch pronunciation, and that'll be either close enough that they'll understand, or that'll be the word you're looking for, which is just handy. It's just nice. It doesn't always work. There are a lot of times it won't work, but like I said, they're fluent in English, so they'll get what you're talking about. They borrow words all the time. The internet over there is just internet. Google is just Google. iPhone is just iPhone. Sometimes you get silly words like their old people tend to ride around on these little motorized, like little, I don't even know. They're kind of like those things people here go shopping with in the supermarket, where it has the basket on the front and they just sit in that chair and like and drive around the supermarket. Except old people there like ride those around like for reals. Like it's a serious thing. And those are just called scootmobiles. It's a scootmobile. I'm just gonna hop on the scootmobile and scoot around. So kind of fun. Verbs are easy to learn and they're fun to learn. Verbs always follow the same conjugation pattern. There are very few verbs that don't. Like to read is lezen, Lezen. to conjugate, you just cut off the en. So ik lees, I read. Hij leest, he reads. Zij leest, she reads. Het leest, it reads. And then, easiest part of all, if you're using a plural subject, so wij or we, jullie, plural you, zij, them, hij and zij, he and she, then you just say the verb. You don't do anything to it. Wij lezen, jullie lezen, zij lezen, hij and zij zijn aan het lezen. I mean, you just use a verb. So that's fun. It's easy to learn verbs and use them correctly. It's always just stem T.
Learning the language with me, I'm not the kind of person that can just sit down and learn from a textbook and just read the textbook and soak in the information. There were, missionaries like that on my mission, but that's just not how I learned. The way I learned was going out and just talking with people, Like I would often ask people grammar questions on the street. I'd ask them, say like, "Hey, I'm trying to learn Dutch. Like, is this how you say this?" Or like, "What's the word for this?" And that's more how I learned. But every city you'll serve in is a lot different, just because like everywhere has its own dialect. They all speak Dutch differently. Like I served in a city called Eindhoven for about 6 months, and they're normally people like with an R, like just kind of regular Dutch would say maar, but in Brabant, or like the province I was in, they'd say like marg, and it almost sounded like there's a G on it. That's another thing about the Dutch language, is the G is in the back of your throat, and that like it causes some sore throats for a while, but eventually you get used to speaking it. And I honestly think the best way to speak Dutch is just to kind of think the way that you learn it in the MTC, like the vocabulary rules and all the grammar and all that, just kind of to think that way and to learn vocabulary along the way. I mean, you'll come home eventually after your mission and you'll sound really weird speaking English because you'll be thinking Dutch, but at the same sense, that's kind of the way I would suggest learning it.
Something that took me a little while to figure out is when you first hear Dutch, they have a lot of guttural G's or CH, and that's, I guess, to our ears, or to mine at least, that was the first thing that hit you. You're like, wow, they're just clearing their throat the whole time, So, you're saying something like goeiemorgen, you just hear the g, and you go, whoa, what are they saying? But as I was trying to learn the language and got a little more familiar with it, I realized I'd say the hardest part for an American to learn Dutch is not necessarily the guttural part. Once you get that down, it's fairly straightforward. But I would say it's actually the way they do their vowels. The way that, because especially a traditional American accent is kind of like, if you compare it to like those in the UK or something, it's a lot harder. We just, our R's, or we're like biting and kind of chewing on our words, just to kind of give it an illustration. But whereas in the Netherlands, they round their vowels. There's more sounds like "ow" or "oo," or I can't even do it right half the time, but they're just softer. And it's difficult to figure it out till you start trying. And once you get the basics of the language down, I spent 2 years trying to work on just the simple vowel combinations to get them just right in different words. Still haven't got it perfect. But that, I'd say, is one of the things that sets you apart as an American. They hear you, if you've seen the film The Best 2 Years, they have one of the elders there. They just have the worst American accent you could possibly imagine. So, he'll be like, "Goedemorgen, mevrouw, mijn collega en ik," and it's just so hard, and like, just like he's just rocks falling out of his mouth. Whereas when a Dutch person says it, it rounds it off. It's goedemorgen, and it mevrouw, and they do different things with their R's to just make it just sounds more natural. And so that, we've gone on long enough about that, but that's basically I'd say the biggest difference, and one of the things that catches most people up is those vowel sounds.